I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
He was the actor.
Who do you think you are, a couple of queens or something?
He was a force and a king.
You get up, you big guts.
He's quite simply the best actor in cinema.
What do you want me to do, send you some flowers?
He was the god.
You stupid, ignorant slob.
He was a devil, but such an adorable one.
You would do well to take me seriously.
He was really capable of all human emotions, which is what made him a genius.
Horror. Marlon Brando, now on Biography.
He was the ultimate rebel.
Do it to him before he does it to you.
Dangerous.
That boy was hungry.
Explosive.
You can act like a man.
Passionate.
You don't ever leave me, baby.
Marlon Brando channeled his bitter contempt for authority.
Well, I really don't feel I need to defend myself. I can lick this guy with one hand.
And the scars left by his unhappy childhood into performances that would change acting forever.
I want you to rest well, and a month from now, this Hollywood big shot's gonna give you what you want.
Well, he is the most influential actor.
Robert De Niro and Al Pacino and Dustin Hoffman and Gene Hackman all trace their roots to him. He's like the Mozart, the Beethoven of our generation.
When we were coming up, it was always Brando this, Brando that.
But the actor's critics were as vocal as his champions. He was called self-indulgent, self-destructive. Some even questioned his sanity.
You are making me really angry now.
And his death, at age 80, left many asking once more why the genius who had revolutionized acting had seemed to reject his remarkable gift.
He really did, in the best ways and some of the worst ways, hold the mirror up to nature.
He was born in America's heartland, in Omaha, Nebraska, on April 3, 1924. His father, Marlon Brando Sr., was a successful traveling salesman. His mother, Dodie, was a gifted amateur actress at the local Omaha Playhouse. In 1938, Marlon moved with his parents and two sisters to a rented farmhouse in Libertyville, Illinois. But behind the facade of a happy American household was a family torn apart by alcohol and domestic violence.
Marlon Brando Sr. was a drinker and a wife batterer. Dodie was an alcoholic. Marlon would take her home from bars, and he literally would take her home when she was very drunk and nurse her back to health.
He told me on different occasions she might be passing out or in a toxic state. He learned to imitate the animals on the farm, and then neighbors and friends to awaken her, to get her to pay attention to him. That was the beginning of his acting. It's also one of the reasons acting was painful in a lot of ways.
I think he adored his mother. She'd always been in love with the theater. I think that's where that came from. His father was rather a handsome man, overbearing man.
Marlon truly hated his father for what he perceived as the betrayal of the beloved mother. The mother several times attempted to commit suicide. It is said Marlon's father was slapping the mother around, and Marlon came to his mother's defense by running upstairs and grabbing his dad's .45 out of the dresser and coming down and supposedly putting the gun up to the old man's temple and said, "You do that once more, and I'm going to kill you."
He went to the same military school as his father and was thrown out. He felt that he wasn't worthy, wasn't liked, wasn't good.
But during Marlon's time at Shattuck Academy, a sympathetic teacher encouraged him to channel his sensitivity and his rage into a new outlet: acting. For Brando, performing was also an emotional connection back to his mother, who was pleased with his new path.
Marlon's mother prevailed on the father to let Marlon go to New York and study acting at the New School for Social Research.
1943, Manhattan was teeming with playwrights, actors, left-wing activists, and thousands of available women. All were drawn to the dynamic and slightly dangerous Marlon Brando.
He had great acuity about assessing people and disliked cliches. He didn't want to be conventional.
Pushing boundaries in every direction, the 19-year-old also had countless love affairs, reportedly with both women and men. But he allowed few people to get close to him. One exception was a childhood friend from Illinois, who'd also moved to Manhattan to be an actor. His name was Wally Cox.
They were an unlikely couple as far as friends are concerned. Wally was very, seemingly very frail, and Marlon was quite the opposite. But they had a relationship that was very deeply rooted. And I think it may have come from the fact that they both had very troubled relationships with their parents.
At the new school, Marlon found in his acting teacher, Stella Adler, a surrogate mother, and someone who could channel his passion into disciplined performance.
He began acting not as a, that's what I think I'd like to do, that's a lifelong vacation, but because he was accepted there. He wasn't criticized. It was the first time in his life that he heard good things about himself. So he followed that path.
Marlon was spectacular. I remember Stella gave us an improvisation where we were all to do a club act. Marlon went home and got a record of Judy Garland singing the trolley song, and he got dressed in a dress that Judy Garland would wear, and he lip-synced. Clang, clang, clang went the trolley. So well done, so Garland-esque. No fooling around, no camping, no nothing. The real thing.
In 1944, Stella's 22-year-old protege landed a small part in a major Broadway play, the sentimental drama, I Remember Mama. Ever the prankster, Marlon claimed in the theater program to be a native of Calcutta. Only in his performance was he shockingly truthful.
Actors emoted in those days. They were very phony and extravagant and very theatrical, and he was very quiet and realistic, and he mumbled, and this was new, totally new.
My admiration for him and my affection for him was just because we were just buddies in some way. And one of my best friends was Monty Clift. He and Monty would come down to our apartment together, and you see this pictures of us goofing around. Got the camera, and Marlon and Monty are going through something. We worked this thing out, but mostly Marlon worked on what he was going to do. Marlon carrying on, Monty handling the situation, just astonished and astounded. And I'm to be found over there wearing one of my wife's Easter bonnets and kidding around, and Marlon's got a couple of balloons under his shirt, and I can't stop laughing.
Like most of his New York friends, Marlon hated what he considered the phoniness and greed of the Hollywood movie industry, which was more focused on profit than art. But even he couldn't resist the chance to screen test in 1947 for a major studio film, Rebel Without a Cause.
Marlon, what were the shows that you've done in New York? Name one or two for me.
I was in Canada with Catherine Cornell, and I was in Eagle Rampant with Tallulah Bankhead, and
I Remember Mama.
With Sophie Rosenstein.
Not quite.
And
Oh, Truckline Cafe.
oh yeah, Truckline Cafe.
That's good enough. Now will you turn your head for us?
Sure.
Brando didn't get the part, but back on Broadway, a more intriguing offer awaited Marlon from director Elia Kazan and playwright Tennessee Williams. The new drama, A Streetcar Named Desire, was intended by its author to center on its heroine, a neurotic Southern belle named Blanche Dubois, played by Jessica Tandy. When Kazan cast Marlon as Blanche's crude and domineering brother-in-law, Stanley Kowalski, who rapes Blanche at the play's climax, the drama's focus shifted to the little-known Brando. Brando's electrifying performance was like a punch in the gut. Audience members could almost feel the sweat of a hot New Orleans night in Marlon's sexually charged presence.
I've been on to you from the start, and not once did you pull the wool over this boy's eyes.
It was a force like a storm on the stage. You know, he just burned up everything in the immediate vicinity. Marlon would say, here I am, standing on the stage, and it's just me and just you.
Don't you come toward me another step,
You're gonna what?
Something awful will happen, it will.
What kind of act are you putting on now?
Don't, I'm in danger.
You want some roughhouse, son? All right, let's have a little roughhouse. We've had this state with each other from the beginning.
A Streetcar Named Desire made 23-year-old Marlon Brando an overnight Broadway star. It also convinced Hollywood executives that the actor's dangerous sex appeal might translate to movie screens at a time when producers were hungry to capitalize on New York's new pool of dynamic stage actors. But Marlon's raw style was worlds apart from the carefully groomed stars who dominated the screens during the 1940s, and Brando refused to come to Hollywood on anyone's terms but his own. Finally, in 1949, he was convinced by producer and liberal activist Stanley Kramer to make his film debut, in a movie that Kramer promised would pull no punches. The Men was the story of a soldier bitterly facing life after World War II as a paraplegic.
This was real method acting. He lived in a veterans hospital. He would go drinking with disabled vets every night at a bar. And one night they were all sitting in their wheelchairs drinking beer, and this kind of nutty religious fanatic came in and told all these guys, if you believe in Jesus, you will be able to walk again. And suddenly Brando rose to his feet, and of course everyone had thought that he was a paraplegic. He rose to his feet and he began doing a jig up and down the bar.
Brando, as a man who fought twice.
I want to apologize to you.
This is the exciting story of the rough and tough men who fought their way through the beachheads and battlefields of World War II.
I love you.
Three months before The Men was released, Marlon was even more pleased to sign on with director Elia Kazan for the eagerly awaited film version of their Broadway triumph, A Streetcar Named Desire. An ex-communist who shared Brando's contempt for Hollywood, Kazan waged fierce battles with censors over Streetcar's rough sexuality. But nothing could blunt Brando's explosive performance opposite Vivien Leigh as Blanche Dubois and Kim Hunter as Stanley Kowalski's wife, Stella.
Who do you think you are, a pair of queens? Just remember what Huey Long said, that every man's a king, and I'm the king around here. And don't you forget it.
It was like he wasn't judging the character. I mean, the character that he plays in Streetcar Named Desire is an ugly guy, is a terrible guy in some ways, but there was something that he brought to it. You can understand him. He's able to engage you, to almost understand his rotten simplicity, and made it entertaining.
All right, let's have a little roughhouse.
A Streetcar Named Desire earned Marlon Brando his first Oscar nomination for Best Actor. The film also convinced studios that post-war audiences would accept a star whose rough-edged persona was far more real than that of most leading men. 27-year-old Marlon Brando had become an icon for a new generation of actors.
He was everywhere. Everybody went crazy. Everybody was wearing torn T-shirts. Everybody was, Stella!
Hey, Stella!
Everybody was imitating all of these crazy things, you know. He just got into your brain.
This is what was so ironic about Brando, is that he went against the star system and couldn't help being a star. He just had a charisma that was matchless.
Brando's magnetism also made him one of the busiest bachelors in Hollywood. His romantic escapades became instant legend. Marlon's affairs reportedly ran into the hundreds, and included such actresses as Rita Moreno, Shelley Winters, and Marilyn Monroe.
Sex was a big thing in Marlon's life. It was mood, music, lighting, poetry, all the things that, whatever other things you can add in to the experience. I remember one night in Hawaii, he made these beds of gardenias. And we were both supposed to have our love affairs on these. It was so horrifyingly uncomfortable that, because gardenias are nice, but the little pointy things. But he kept saying, no, it's all right, you gotta live with the fragrance. Those things were important to him.
The key to Marlon is he was always afraid of being taken foolishly. That's why the women in his life were unusual women. They were alley cats. And they, I think, proposed no particular threat. But each one had something to offer him, whether it was language, intellect, an exotic thing, honesty, talent, affection.
Riding the creative high of Streetcar, Marlon and Elia Kazan re-teamed in 1952 for the biographical drama Viva Zapata. The film was another reflection of their socially iconoclastic attitude. It told the story of real-life revolutionary Emiliano Zapata, who defied the Mexican government and became a hero of the people.
These matters take time. You must be patient.
With your permission, my president, we make our tortillas out of corn, not patience. And patience will not cross an armed and guarded fence. To do as you suggest, to verify those boundaries, we need your authority to cross that fence.
I cannot possibly exercise such authority.
Would you advise it?
You know, it just had an amazing range. There's nothing further away than Marlon Brando to the real Emiliano Zapata in looks. There's nothing further away. I mean, we're talking two different planets. And when you watch that movie, the feeling that he brings into and the execution of his choices, he really understood what Zapata stood for.
Stack your arms and disband your army.
And who will enforce the laws once we have them?
The regular army, the police.
They're the ones we just fought and beat.
He brings in this dignity and this understanding and intensity and charisma.
Give me your watch. Give it to me. It's a beautiful watch. It's expensive. Now take my rifle. Now you can have your watch back. But without this, never.
Once I interviewed some deaf actors and I asked them who their favorite actor was, and they said Marlon Brando. And I said, why? And they said, because even though we can't hear what he's saying, we know exactly what he means. In other words, his expression told everything.
By 1953, Marlon Brando was on a roll in Hollywood. Besides helping open the door to other rough-edged and realistic actors, like his disciple James Dean, his rugged charm and his sensitivity as an actor had powered 2 back-to-back hits. And that year, he decided to shatter his screen image as an inarticulate man of violence by playing Shakespeare's Mark Antony in director Joseph L. Mankiewicz's film of Julius Caesar.
Everybody wanted Marlon Brando, but my father especially wanted him because he'd never done Shakespeare, Brando.
He wanted to prove to the world that he could be a classical actor, because everyone was making fun of him for being this mumbler, this brute. And he went back home to his farm, the farm that he'd bought his parents in Illinois. He stood in the fields and shouted up out those speeches for his mother.
Hear the words that have echoed through the ages. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him.
Brando was very nervous about the prospect of doing Shakespeare. And Marlon sent back tapes of himself doing Shakespeare. And I remember Dad did play it as an anonymous actor for the brass at MGM and said, here's a good actor. And they said, who's that? And he said, Marlon Brando. And people were floored.
His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man.
Brando followed Julius Caesar with a total about-face, playing an authority-battling biker in the box office hit, The Wild One.
Johnny, remember the night? The first time I went out scrambling with the rebels. Remember?
What do you want me to do, sing some flowers?
Brando didn't just play the part of a rebel. In 1954, Marlon was sued by 20th Century Fox for refusing to appear in The Egyptian, a film Fox wanted him to make as part of a two-picture deal. But that year, work was overshadowed by a crushing personal loss. Marlon was devastated by the death of his mother, Dodie, the person he'd struggled hardest in his life to please.
He always felt very dear about his mother. He was there in the hospital when she died, and he told me what a sacred and solemn moment that was.
I think the effect of his mother's death was profound. She was the one who could give him approval like no one else could. And after his mother died, it seems that Marlon stops caring.
Returning to work, Brando reluctantly agreed to complete his deal with 20th Century Fox by starring in Desiree, a romanticized biography of Napoleon, co-starring Gene Simmons.
I have come from the steppes of Russia where my soldiers lie buried. The ones that still live are snowblind, and they whimper and cry like children who do not understand what has happened to them. I have come from a land where men crawl under their dead comrades to keep warm.
Marlon was far more proud of his other 1954 release, a film that re-teamed him with Elia Kazan for another defining screen role. The socially progressive drama On the Waterfront cast Brando alongside Rod Steiger, Eva Marie Saint, and Carl Malden in the story of Terry Malloy, an ex-boxer turned small-time mob enforcer who becomes a government informant.
We've got the fattest piers and the fattest harbor in the world. Everything moves in and out, we take our cut.
I better get you home. There's too many guys around here with only one thing in their mind. Am I gonna see you again?
Get a doctor! Who'd want to kill Joey?
Listen, you know who the pistols are. You're going to keep still until they cut you down one by one?
Stay away from me!
The first time I actually saw him in a movie was On the Waterfront, and it made a profound impression on me. It still does. He was never afraid to show the feminine side. Marlon had a great balance.
You wanted my philosophy of life. Do it to him before he does it to you.
Friendly! Come on out of there!
Hollywood's great night when the experts confirm the public's choice.
In less than a decade, the 30-year-old had reached the peak of his profession.
Marlon Brando, the Oscar he now gets from Bette Davis, is for his waterfront portrayal.
He'd also become part of the Hollywood establishment he hated. It was one role Marlon Brando refused to play.
He would just interrupt something and say something completely unthinkable. Like this rather formal dinner we were at. I'd said, Marlon, if you're going to come to this dinner, you got to behave like us folks. He said, no, I know what it is. I know it. And he was perfect. I mean, he was the perfect gentleman. And we were all having dinner, and I thought, God, he's really good. Marlon's being such a good fellow. And he turned to the hostess and he said, how big are your moons? She said, what? And there was, people had a ball of veal in their cheeks. And he said, what are they, about that size? Let's see them. And you never knew, is he trying to make scrambled eggs out of this event and these people? Or is that just real? Is that him? I don't think anybody knows the answer to that, including Marlon Brando.
The actor was increasingly torn by his contempt for Hollywood and the pleasure he took in the power of his fame.
He hated it and loved it both. On the one hand, being a celebrity allowed Marlon to take his revenge on the world that had so deeply hurt him, so deeply scarred him. On the other hand, he hated it because he knew it was false and ephemeral.
Marlon also knew that some of his New York theater colleagues considered him a Hollywood sellout.
I think that he made a disastrous decision by not insisting on doing more theater all through his life. In the theater, actors are valued, but they're not paid these enormous, deluded salaries. They're not allowed to exercise the power that Brando exercised.
Brando formed his own production company. To run it, he surprised many by hiring the man he claimed to hate most, his own father, who was now living off Marlon's wealth.
It was complicated because his father was the nominal president of the production company. It was called Pennybaker because that was his mother's maiden name. It gave Marlon a chance to take shots at him, to demean and diminish him. But yet, when Marlon would come into the studio, he'd begin by giving his father a hug. But inside were very, very tempestuous feelings about his father.
Mr. Brando, tell me this, was he hard to handle as a child?
I think he had the usual childhood traits. I think he had probably a little more trouble with his parents than most children do.
He gave his father this job, investing his money and taking care of all of his money, and his father promptly lost it all. And that's why Brando ultimately had to sign this huge picture deal to pay off all of his debts.
Marlon, would you like 30 seconds to defend yourself?
Well, I really don't feel I need to defend myself. I can lick this guy with one hand, so let it go.
It was a grievance that Brando carried on into adult life and beyond the death of the father. And I think he fed off it and fueled off it. Marlon said after the father was dead, he wished he was still alive so he could beat him up. But, you know, then you have to say, well, why did Marlon, feeling about his father the way he did, or said he did, why did he entrust so much of his business affairs or his money to his father? The way I read it, Brando was psychologically daunted by his father.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think you've all heard about the man who actually paid $1 million for a movie story. His name, of course, Samuel Goldwyn. And the story he bought was Guys and Dolls.
By 1955, it seemed there was nothing Marlon Brando couldn't do. That year, he charmed audiences and most critics by singing and dancing in Joseph L. Mankiewicz' film of the Broadway musical Guys and Dolls.
Dad sent him a telegram saying, how would you like to play Sky Masterson in Guys and Dolls? And Marlon cabled him back, have never done a musical before. And Dad cabled back, don't worry, neither have I.
Marlon Brando never danced or sang a note in his life until he met Goldwyn. But he sings and he dances in Guys and Dolls, and he'll fracture you.
Would you be open to a proposition?
I've had those, no.
Don't flatter yourself. I'm talking business. I am in a position to supply you with the raw material you need for your work, namely sinners.
Brando took on other adventurous roles, a Japanese servant in The Tea House of the August Moon, a Southern soldier changed by an interracial romance in Sayonara.
I don't have anything against this girl here.
Look, Major,
I'm gonna marry my girl if I have to give up my American citizenship to do it.
Oh, Kelly, you stupid, ignorant slob.
But Marlon's hostility toward Hollywood often put him at odds with producers and directors who had little time for what they considered Brando's self-indulgence. In return, Marlon saw them as narrow-minded authority figures, cut from the same cloth as his father.
The crucial thing you have to say about Brando is that he went in search of authority figures he could offend. Many, many people who worked with him and who came to work with him with the best intentions went away in despair, saying he's a spoiled kid. It has to be done his way, or he goes away with some vast story about how he was wronged, he was offended. And I think that fits the psychological pattern that he was a wronged kid. Early on, Brando got a notion that youthful intractability, the young animal, was him. And he lost track of how far it damaged and really destroyed his own nature and destiny.
Marlon's unhappiness manifested itself in his growing weight. He began to eat compulsively.
He began to be a kind of food addict as opposed to being an alcoholic. Both of his parents were alcoholics. I think he became a food addict.
Brando's personal life was drifting into chaos, but Marlon thought he'd found an emotional anchor after meeting a raven-haired, aspiring actress named Anna Kashfi.
I was working with Spencer Tracy on a movie called The Mountain, and we were having lunch with Pearl Bailey and George Saunders, and there was this idiot man, behaving, and I said, "Who's that?" And Pearl told me it was Marlon Brando. He was very quiet, very shy, not like a movie star at all.
She was wearing an Indian sari, and she said she was a pure-blooded Indian, and he fell madly in love with her.
She was the Brando woman personified. Dark-skinned, voluptuous, young, kind of a dazzling smile. And when he went over to meet her, he was at his romantic best.
In 1957, when Anna became pregnant, Brando impulsively agreed to marriage.
He said, of course, we'll have to get married, And then, of course, into the marriage, it was hectic. It was really bad. He was seeing other people, men included.
Marlon was also infuriated when he learned that Anna was not Indian, but a girl born in Wales, Great Britain, who grew up in India. By the time their son, Christian Brando, was born in 1958, Marlon had left the marriage.
Christian, certainly grew up in a chaotic home life situation. Anna was drinking a lot. She also had a seizure disorder and was taking anticonvulsants while pregnant. And Marlon simply pulled out of there. He was not there as a father.
After the baby was born, the nurse that he'd hired was bathing the baby. And I said, "What kind of a nurse are you? Are you a baby nurse or what?" She said, "Oh, no, I'm a psychiatric nurse." And I said, "Well, why are you, doing this to the baby?" And she said, "No, it's for you."
Christian Brando's birth only intensified Marlon and Anna's battles, which ended in divorce court and a bitter custody battle over their son. At the same time, Brando was turning up the heat on another romance, this time with Movida Castaneda, a Mexican-born actress 7 years his senior, who'd appeared with Clark Gable in the 1935 film Mutiny on the Bounty. Although Brando was seeing other women, Marlon agreed to marry Movida in 1960, after she became pregnant.
Movida stood up to him, and he was intrigued by that. Sexually, she supposedly was very, very much there. She liked to hang out with the guys. She wasn't a coquette. She wasn't a starlet. She wasn't a wannabe. She was up front, and Marlon liked that. On the other hand, that marriage did not, although it produced 2 children, did not survive, basically because Marlon was out screwing his brains out.
Brando would be an absentee father in most of his children's lives, but he did enjoy an affectionate relationship with his first child with Movida, Miko Brando.
He always told me, be yourself, be honest, be happy, And, but he gave good advice. Manners was very important to him. Even though we had housekeepers, he'd always ask us to still make our beds, still have respect for her, say thank you, clean up the dishes, do our chores. Just because we had a housekeeper didn't mean that we're meant to be slobs. And always say thank you. There was times when we would go out to dinner with the family, and if one of us did not say thank you to the waiter, he would tell the waiter to take back the food until we said thank you.
To most of the world, Brando projected a very different image. Even his work as an actor was coming under attack.
Shoot him.
In the World War II drama, The Young Lions, co-starring Dean Martin and Marlon's friend, Montgomery Clift, Brando divided critics with his daringly sympathetic portrayal of a morally troubled German soldier.
I'm sick of Africa, and I'm sick of the great German army, and I'm sick of doing my duty. I should have shot you. What? I said I should have shot you. I ought to shoot you now. You better learn to drive this first. You will destroy us. Men like you poison an army. You let discipline slip a little one day, and a little more the next day, and soon you are nothing. You are not able to fight at all. I should have shot you. Yeah, why didn't you shoot me then? Because I was an idiot. Yes, you recognize it.
Although The Young Lions was a hit, Brando was growing tired of being controlled by others, and in 1958, he made the bold choice of directing himself on screen. The project was the ambitious, character-driven Western, One-Eyed Jacks, which Marlon took over from the departing Stanley Kubrick. Carl Malden co-starred in the story of an outlaw bent on revenge against a former friend turned bitter enemy. The plot offered yet another dramatic metaphor for Marlon's battles with his father.
You're dying to get me hung, ain't you?
No, kid. You've been trying to get yourself hung for the past 10 years, and this time I think you're gonna make it. You should have quit when you were ahead.
Like you, huh?
Mm-hmm. Like me.
This is a marvelous film, filled with very interesting things. And it really tells you that Marlon had a great eye, great visual sense.
Think it'd be a good idea if you'd hand over your gun.
All right.
Ephraim. Yeah. Ace. Tim. On. Left hand, kid. Dump it.
Unfortunately, during production, Brando was distracted by his divorce and custody battles.
Sadly enough, Marlon basically self-destructed the film. He was totally out of control. His personal life was out of control, so that he lost control of the film.
Unable to juggle the disciplines of producing, directing, and acting, he ran wildly over budget, and his first cut of the film was over 4 hours long.
It ended up being cut not the way he wanted. They forced him to reshoot the ending. And the picture was not released with a great deal of enthusiasm, and so it tanked. People who knew him well, including Stella Adler, who loved him, said the movie One-Eyed Jacks broke his heart, and that after that he really lost his passion for movies.
By 1960, Marlon Brando needed a hit, and his next project, Mutiny on the Bounty, seemed to promise not only a return to greatness for Brando as an actor, but also box office glory.
The Bounty herself, built in historic shipyards in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. First ship ever to be built from the keel up, especially for a motion picture. Then, across the world, a truly global project to the actual locales, the islands of Tahiti and Pitcairn.
A classic story of social rebellion. It was based on the true story of English seaman Fletcher Christian, who defied one of the British Navy's most senior and authoritarian officers, Captain William Bligh. MGM's 1935 version of the story had won the Oscar for Best Picture. And the studio's lavish remake would boast not only Brando, but a top director, Carol Reed. On location in Tahiti, it wasn't long before Marlon seemed to be living the part of Fletcher Christian. Like his character, Brando fell in love with a beautiful native girl, actress Tarita Taripea, who was Marlon's co-star.
Fletcher Christian is my name.
Is my name?
No. Fletcher.
No. Fletcher.
There's no greater testament to Marlon's interest in dark-skinned women than he married the two women that played Maimiti in the original version of Mutiny on the Bounty and in his version. Tarita was his leading lady, and he found her very appealing.
But Marlon and Tarita's romance was a rare bright spot on a production that became the most troubled and controversial of Brando's career. The actor was unhappy with the script and insecure about his appearance. For over a year, rumors leaked from the set describing a shoot held hostage and pushed millions over budget by its indecisive, bullying star.
He cared very much about his weight. He was ashamed of himself. I talked with the clothier on the production who told me that Marlon went through 53 pair of pants because he kept putting on weight and he kept splitting pants.
He got a considerable, talented director, Carol Reed, really fired from that film, and a lot of people would argue that he destroyed the potential of that film by being as difficult as he was.
And the Saturday Evening Post had an article, and on the cover it says, "How Marlon Brando wasted $6 million on Mutiny on the Bounty." And Marlon sort of looked at it and said, $4 million, maybe.
A story of provocative and colorful characters brought to life by unforgettable star personalities. Marlon Brando is Fletcher Christian, an officer and a gentleman, yet a man among men.
You remarkable pig. You can thank whatever pig god you pray to, you haven't quite turned me into a murderer.
Back in Hollywood, two other films, Cleopatra, starring Elizabeth Taylor, and Something's Got to Give, with Marilyn Monroe, were running ruinously over budget. The industry was getting fed up with what it considered temperamental talent. And when Mutiny on the Bounty finally opened in 1962, Marlon Brando received the worst reviews of his career. The film was a box office disaster. But Mutiny on the Bounty also brought Marlon an unexpected measure of peace. The actor later purchased the Tahitian island of Tetiaroa and began a common-law union with Tarita Taripea. Their relationship produced a son, Teotu, and a daughter, Tarita Zumi Cheyenne.
I think he had a very romantic image of the purity of native peoples. He looked upon South Sea Island as a sort of dream people. He was very drawn to women of color, a native, a person with some deep contact with the earth, the sea, nature.
This island was escape from all of his problems. He really wanted to live there forever. He wanted to create an Eden for himself and for his friends, and he tried to do that.
Returning to Los Angeles, Brando seemed all too ready to confirm his reputation for trouble. Even a close friend, director George England, was frustrated by Marlon's behavior on the set of the political drama, The Ugly American.
Sometimes Marlon would come late, and he did not want to be blamed for being late. So he'd invent some, I've been looking at the scene, maybe he hadn't even read the scene the night before, and I think if I have to say these lines, it's going to change the whole meaning of the picture.
One of his best friends used to say, Marlon's either at your feet or at your balls. Meaning there were a lot of people who worked with him that never had the slightest problem. And a lot of people who had big problems. He would stare you straight in the eye when he talked to you. Very intimidating. And he would size people up instantly. And if he thought you were a phony or he thought you were lying, God help you, then he was trouble.
If Brando felt more disconnected from Hollywood than ever, he was painfully sensitive to the political upheaval sweeping America in the 1960s.
Actors have always been shills and clacks, and maybe it's a cynical attitude, but the fact is that it will make people pause long enough to consider whether it is right or wrong that a Negro should vote.
Marlon's political progressivism can be traced to his mother. His lifelong sympathy for the underdog, for black folks, Indians, children. Marlon was always a soft touch for a kid, particularly a poor kid. This all goes back to Dodie Brando.
Following his mother's example, Brando had been an active Democrat since the 1940s. 2 decades later, he channeled the passion he once held for acting into civil rights.
Marlon had been in the civil rights struggle before Dr. King showed up.
Yes.
At the March on Washington, the Lincoln Memorial, there was Marlon, and on so many other occasions.
He did walk with Martin Luther King. I mean, that was something very important to him.
We're all going to talk about civil rights. We're all going to go on the television and say what we know, because the country is ignorant.
I'll never forget the night that Reverend King was shot, and I turned on the news, and Marlon was walking through Harlem with Mayor Lindsay, and there were snipers, and there was a lot of unrest, and he kept walking and talking through those neighborhoods with Mayor Lindsay. It was one of the most incredible acts of courage I ever saw, and it meant a lot, and it did a lot.
But Brando's political courage was in stark contrast with what many considered his dull performances. Typical was the critically panned comedy Bedtime Story, in which he played a womanizing con man opposite David Niven and Shirley Jones.
In a chateau overlooking the French Riviera lived a prince. There was also a brash ex-GI with an equally big heart and even more conquests.
Oh, the stories I'll have for Granny when I get home.
I'm afraid I'm a bit naive when it comes to the weaker sex.
The weaker sex? Remember this, it takes 6 men to carry a guy that was brave. It takes 1 woman to put him there.
He was not very sociable. We would go to parties at Wally Cox's house, and every once in a while, Marlon would just show up. One of the times we got there, and Marlon was underneath the table. He was just sitting, both knees up. I said, "Hi, Marlon." "Hi," he said. I said, "Why is he under the table, Wally?" And he said, "He's more comfortable under the table." So that's how I first met Marlon Brando, sitting under a dining room table, okay?
I first met Marlon on the set of The Chase. It was great to be able to meet him. And we talked, and we had a nice rapport. And then I told my wife, I said, "I think we're going to be like brothers. It's going to be great." And except for the work situation, he never even looked at me or spoke to me again for 8 weeks.
Brando got more and more contemptuous of the whole thing, to the point where he didn't want to learn lines. He would put lines around the table or around places, and then he would look like this, and that was a line he was looking at up there. So he didn't have to learn it.
Stand by for an important announcement. Charles Chaplin directs Marlon Brando and Sophia Loren in A Countess from Hong Kong.
Marlon had high hopes for the romantic comedy A Countess from Hong Kong, directed by another artistic and social rebel, Charles Chaplin. But to Brando's frustration, Chaplin proved just another inflexible authoritarian.
Why this sudden change of attitude?
Why yours?
You know why.
Tippi Hedren.
Perhaps you might know something about this, Your Excellency. It looks like a 2-ring circus.
One of the things that Marlon highly resented was that Charlie acted out each character. He became Sophia Loren. he became the Marlon Brando character. And then he'd say, okay, now you do it.
His own contempt for the business began to take over, but he was never boring. He had a star personality no matter what he did.
By the end of the 1960s, the man once called America's greatest actor was viewed as an impossible egomaniac. Ironically, a new generation of brash young stars had replaced him. Actors whose naturalistic approach owed much to Brando's pioneering work. After a series of creative failures and box office flops, 47-year-old Marlon Brando was now, in the eyes of Hollywood, box office poison. In 1970, rising young director Francis Ford Coppola was on the hunt for a major star for his film of novelist Mario Puzo's bestseller, The Godfather. To play family patriarch Don Corleone, who oversees a criminal empire and the battles within his own family, Coppola and casting director Fred Roos narrowed their list of possible actors to 3 names.
Marlon, George C. Scott, and Laurence Olivier. Francis said, well, which of those 3 do you really want? And I said, well, it would be Marlon. He says, of course, that's who I would want too.
But Paramount executives, including production chief Robert Evans, were strongly opposed to Brando's casting after a decade of box office failures.
Coppola was told he had to give Brando a screen test. So what he said to Brando was, I want to do a makeup test. Unbeknownst to Coppola, Brando had already been experimenting with makeup because he loved to wear makeup more than anything. He stuffed kind of cotton in his face, blackened his hair, and it was just incredible. He was the Don, he was the Godfather. And when Coppola brought the screen test back to the powers that be at Paramount, they didn't even recognize that it was Brando.
On the set, Brando was relaxed, funny, and supportive of his admiring co-stars, including Al Pacino, James Caan, and Robert Duvall.
He was very open and friendly. I don't think he particularly liked rehearsal. I know I don't. We'd take a whole week and he would stall and talk about the Indians, he'd talk about this, he'd talk about that, and then the weekend we'd just go off for the weekend and come back. It was like a strange rehearsal process, but it served the project well in that we got to know each other.
The rest of the cast loved him. He was very accessible. He was a lot of fun. Went along with a lot of practical jokes and pulled some of them himself. A lot of mooning.
Yeah, mooned here, mooned there. Yeah, he got in on it some, yeah. It was great, you know. But she, all of us, you know. Jimmy mooned him from one car to the other going down 2nd Avenue one time. At the end of a workday, Brando was like just tired. He got he laughed. He never knew his lines. He put a big billboard sign in the big scene with Pacino out under the tree.
He'll set up a meeting with someone that you absolutely trust, guaranteeing your safety. And at that meeting, you'll be assassinated.
When they said ready, roll the cameras, he was talking to somebody, got up, said his line, went back, cut, he went back. He minimized the sense of a beginning. In other words, he like de-emphasized the word action. He would go in front of that camera just like he was before. Cut, he'd go back, it was all the same. There was really no beginning. And I learned a lot from watching that.
He had the great good fortune to get one of the real parts in the history of American film, a terrific director, perfect for the project, stellar supporting cast, most of whom were so overjoyed to be working with him because they felt he had been the actor they had modeled themselves on. Therefore, they were perfect to play his family.
Godfather, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. You can act like a man! What's the matter with you? Is this how you turn out a Hollywood Pinocchio that cries like a woman? What can I do? What can I do?
Brando actually appeared in less than half of the film, but his presence dominated every frame.
I want you to eat. I want you to rest well, and a month from now, this Hollywood big shot's gonna give you what you want.
Too late. They start shooting in a week.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
When The Godfather opened in 1972, Brando amazed his harshest critics and gave his loyal fans reason to rejoice. His performance as Don Corleone was hailed as one of the most subtle and powerful in the history of film. The next year, it earned him a second Academy Award for Best Actor. But this time, Brando refused to play Hollywood's game. In his place, he sent an American Indian activist he'd recently met. Born Maria Cruz, she was also known as Sacheen Littlefeather.
I had this speech in my hand, and Howard Koch came up, who was the executive producer of the show, and he told me that if I dare read that speech, that he would have me arrested and that I only had 60 seconds to accept that award, and that was it.
Hello, I'm representing Marlon Brando this evening, and he has asked me to tell you in a very long speech, which I cannot share with you presently because of time, but I will be glad to share with the press afterwards, that he very regretfully cannot accept this very generous award. And the reasons for this being are the treatment of American Indians today by the film industry. Excuse me.
Hollywood hated him for that. Well, first of all, they were giving him the award even though he'd sort of turned against movies. And then he sends up an Indian girl to say he doesn't want it. Just a slap in the face. Everybody was appalled. I thought it was kind of funny.
As an actor, at least, Brando was once again supreme. And in 1973, he followed The Godfather with another powerful, and this time highly personal performance. In the explosive erotic drama Last Tango in Paris, directed by Bernardo Bertolucci, Brando channeled his own rage-driven childhood to improvise the character of a businessman pulled into a self-destructive love affair.
He drew from his life, his memories. It was a lot about his relationship with his father. I think that this particular performance is his greatest act of self-revelation, whereas with Godfather, it's his greatest disguised performance.
Brando's physically and emotionally naked performance seemed to exhaust him as an actor. And after 2 back-to-back film triumphs, Marlon again disappeared from the public eye. He retreated to his Tahitian island and his home in the Hollywood Hills.
Marlon was like the greatest matador who was constantly being challenged, and he'd killed all the bulls, and there really was nothing left for him to prove.
Marlon's sense of isolation grew in 1973 with the death of his oldest friend, Wally Cox, at the age of 48.
Brando was just devastated. He came to the funeral. He climbed up a tree and looked down on everybody. But he got the ashes away from Wally Cox's wife, the box of ashes, and they literally fought over the ashes, and Brando was stronger, so he was able to get the boxes of ashes away from Mrs. Cox, and he kept them first in his car and then by his bed, and he talked to the ashes. And finally, Mrs. Cox was going to sue for the ashes, but she finally said, "I think Marlon needs the ashes more than I do."
In the hills outside of Billings, Montana, motion picture history is being made. America's 2 most electrifying actors are working together for the first time.
In 1976, 51-year-old Marlon Brando finally returned to movie screens, co-starring with Jack Nicholson in the Western, The Missouri Breaks. But on the set, the actor often seemed more interested in playing the familiar role of Marlon Brando, world-famous eccentric.
One time we were getting ready to do a big scene and nobody could find him. And we looked over in this river and there he was sitting in the river with nothing on, picking up little things that were in the water and looking at it. And so we had to wait a half hour until he was ready to come to work. And the rest of the time he never said anything to me or to anybody.
He changes his costume, his accent, and his attitude, often throughout the film.
You hit a guy from 500 yards out, say, why, the suddenness of it, he don't even have a few seconds to make his act of contrition. Not only that, but you never have to look him in the eye. Right there, that makes all the difference.
I would disagree with you, sir. The thing that makes all the difference in the world, I believe, is the fact that it accomplishes the task, you see.
He's read so many stories about Marlon Brando in the newspapers, the magazines, and heard so many lunatic tales about what Marlon Brando did, because people talked about it, that he's given up laughing at them. And he knows it's insane. So he starts behaving insanely. I think his humor was like that.
And you come under the head, know what I do for a living. Now step outside, because my stomach has commenced to growl. Get up! Get up! I want to lie here and lose. No dinner, no nothing.
Brando now showed little interest in acting, even during a reunion with Francis Ford Coppola on the ambitious Vietnam epic Apocalypse Now, based on Joseph Conrad's novel, Heart of Darkness. Marlon played a U.S. colonel who descends into madness and jungle savagery, and who becomes the target of a military assassin, played by Martin Sheen.
Coppola wants Brando for this small part in Apocalypse Now, and Brando says, well, sure, what do you want? I'll do anything for you. Coppola says, well, all I really want is that you turn up in shape, because he wanted Brando to come to that film looking like a Marine officer. And he wanted him to have read and studied Conrad's The Heart of Darkness. He turned up in terrible shape, and he hadn't looked at the book.
Coppola was forced to hire a body double for most of Marlon's wide shots. The director also faced another problem. His script wasn't finished.
We knew that eventually we had to find this guy Kurtz, and that I would have to terminate him, and that was a foregone conclusion. But how we got there was the adventure with Marlon.
Are my methods unsound?
I don't see any method at all.
Francis and Marlon talked for like a full week. The crew was up there ready to shoot, and it was costing money every day, but Marlon wasn't ready.
He and I and Francis were sitting on the set talking about this scene, and Marlon had the pages of the script in his hands, and he started to fold them, and he got very involved in that as we were talking, and I couldn't take my eyes off him. I wondered what he was doing. Eventually, he made a little hat out of the script and put it on his head. That was his way of saying, I don't think this is going to work.
When we did a lot of those scenes, Francis had him wired with an earphone, and he would just start acting, and Francis would give him subjects, which would trip his memory of what they had discussed. And then he would just kind of wail, just free-flow dialogue that he made up.
Horror. Horror.
Brando earned over $1 million for a performance that sharply divided critics. By the time the film reached theaters, he'd also received a record $3.7 million for just 12 days' work on the fantasy blockbuster Superman. When approaching Brando for the project, director Richard Donner and co-writer Tom Mankiewicz quickly learned that Marlon still delighted in testing others.
We went up to see Brando. Both of us very intimidated. We were going to be in the presence of the great man. And right away, Marlon said, you know, on Krypton, he said, maybe we don't look like people. And Dick and I exchanged a glance. He said, maybe we look like a bagel or a green suitcase. And I'm just horrified inside. And he kept going on. He said, and maybe we don't even speak. Maybe we just make electronic beeps. Well, I said, oh my God, we've got a green suitcase making beeps. Marlon said, you know, kids love Superman. He said, they know everything about it. And Dick jumped in right away, and he said, and that's why you can't look like a bagel and beep. And Marlon started roaring with laughter, and it was so clear he had been putting us on. He just wanted to see who he was working with. He wanted to see if you were the kind of phony that wrote down bagel. That's very interesting.
Superman and Apocalypse Now had earned Brando nearly $5 million. But by 1980, Marlon wanted to be seen as more than an actor.
Marlon was a self-educated person. He never finished high school. He felt inferior that he had not gone to college, that he was not thought of as an intellectual, that he was not credited with making some kind of palpable contribution to the betterment of human life.
Brando's unhappiness was reflected by his size.
Marlon ate in order to disfigure himself. Marlon used putting on weight as an expression of self-contempt and self-destruction. You cannot be a matinee idol if you weigh 300 pounds.
He insisted that the refrigerator be padlocked. He couldn't unlock it. But the next day I would come to work and notice that there were empty ice cream cartons, wrappers for Big Macs. He would call the local McDonald's, have somebody drive up to the property and toss the stuff over the fence.
One of our conversations about it, he said, it's an addiction. It's like drugs or booze. Eating's an addiction. Sometimes he'd go on these absolutely ascetic diets. He'd eat with chopsticks, just bits of greens and stuff. And that was as comical to me as, because I knew after I left, he'd be down at Ralph's in the ice cream department.
But even at 300 pounds, Marlon Brando was still a charismatic figure, one who had no trouble finding female companionship.
He was involved with the Yacho Tsubaki, a very lovely Japanese lady, and that ended when she discovered that Christina, the maid, was pregnant. One day Marlon asked me to find a house for him. So I said, well, how big a house? Oh, maybe 3-4 bedrooms, nice house. About that moment, Christina walks in, about 8 months pregnant. And I looked at Christina and I looked at Marlon and I said, oh, now I know why you need that house.
Marlon Brando's countless affairs over 4 decades had produced 10 children, amid rumors of more. He was usually an absentee father, but he did attempt to protect their privacy.
I think that he had a great tenderness towards children because I think he probably wanted to be a child himself still. He could be a wonderfully affectionate, playful father when he saw you, but then he might not see you for months.
When it came to his oldest son, Christian, Marlon had always had a stormy relationship. For 18 years, Christian had been shuttled between his warring parents. By the 1980s, he seemed intimidated by his father and resentful of Marlon's fame. Christian himself was a would-be actor, although he mostly seemed interested in women, drugs, and guns.
You get in a certain habit and there's a pattern. It's like cigarette smoking or, sex, drugs, whatever.
Brando also worried about Christian's half-sister, Cheyenne, whose erratic emotional state seemed to worsen after a 1989 car accident.
Cheyenne was beautiful. She was vivacious and appealing, sort of mysterious. Something in some deep pool inside that you get pulled into. But her behavior became more and more eccentric, and there were these suicide attempts. But he devoted himself to her, spent a lot of his year solely with her. He didn't know what to do, but neither did anybody else.
In 1990, Marlon learned that his emotionally unstable daughter was pregnant. The father-to-be was Dag Drolet, son of one of Marlon's oldest friends from Tahiti.
He was very worried about her because of her relationship with Dag Drolet, and there was no question that drugs were involved in this, and she was under the influence quite often.
Christian, desperate to please his father, make points with his father, took Marlon's instructions to, quote, find out about the relationship between your sister and Drolet as something more than just grilling him about what are your intentions, young man.
On the night of May 16th, 1990, Christian angrily confronted Dag Drolet with a loaded .45 in the living room of Marlon's home. Shots were fired, and minutes later, Beverly Hills police received a telephone call from Marlon Brando. He told them that his daughter's boyfriend, Dag Drolet, had been fatally shot. 2 days later, Christian Brando was charged with first-degree murder.
He was absolutely devastated by what happened to his son, but by the same token, he stood by his son and got him the best legal advice, and he was always there for him.
It is the position of the district attorney's office that Christian Brando is a definite flight risk.
Sometimes in life, you have to duke it out. And that's what he's going to have to do. He's going to have to duke it out.
In 1991, Christian Brando pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter. 1 month later, his emotionally drained father took the stand in his son's defense.
Testimony you may give in the con. Would you please state your name for the record?
Marlon Brando, Jr.
Marlon was extremely distraught.
You ask these guys to shut up.
I know that people accused him of acting. He wasn't.
I saw Dag laying there. And I tried to get hold of myself. And I felt his pulse on his neck. He still had a pulse. And I breathed into his mouth. And I called 911.
Christian Brando was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
I'm sorry. And, it's not my family, it's me. I am at fault with this. And if I could trade places with Dag, I would right now.
Marlon Brando was consumed by guilt, but even worse was to come. On Easter Sunday, 1995, Cheyenne Brando committed suicide in Tahiti by hanging herself. She was 25 years old. Her father was too grief-stricken to attend her funeral.
The grotesqueness of it is that, you know, she was this ravishingly beautiful young woman. But at the time she killed herself, she was hugely fat, like her father. He was just overwhelmed with guilt and grief.
Marlon became even more reclusive. We were sitting outside, and I tried to cheer him up or something, and he just wasn't going to be cheered up. He says, "Yeah, it's a great day." He says, "My daughter has killed herself. My son is in prison, and the father of my only grandchild has been killed." I believe he was a loving father. He was very concerned about all of his kids. I guess he always felt that he had created his own demons there. There was just nothing he could do to change the way things were.
Life is too grim generally for most people, and when you're down to your last nickel and your last hope, I think that all you've got left is laughter.
Marlon Brando had spent millions on his son Christian's legal defense. Desperate for money, Brando reluctantly agreed to a handful of highly paid acting assignments throughout the 1990s. Few seem to have been chosen for their artistic quality.
I don't need to gild a lily. I don't give a damn about that. I've made some real dogs, and I did it just for the money.
Brando also made no attempt to memorize his dialogue.
We came up with a device whereby a loop would be worn under his shirt, and someone could speak off stage into the microphone. The loop around Marlon's neck would pick up the signal and then retransmit that to the earpiece in his ear, so he could be fed line by line what he was doing.
I think in a way he was spoiled, and that's why he eventually put on weight, became self-destructive. I mean, you know, and found a way out, so to speak, a negative way out. Well, I always said to him, you know, you would have been a great Othello. Shakespeare said, "No, boring." He didn't want to do it.
I did a movie called Dry White Season, which was really the last time I had any daily time to see him. And his life was very changed. I found him competitive, wounded, in pain, exhausted, and sometimes mean-spirited.
Occasionally, Brando shared his still remarkable gifts with the public. In the hit comedy The Freshman, co-starring Matthew Broderick, he shrewdly satirized his own performance in The Godfather as a mafia don.
Well, The Freshman is a charming film. The Freshman is sweet comedy, and he and Matthew Broderick had a real chemistry together. It's a film that lifts your heart a bit.
On the set of the romantic comedy Don Juan DeMarco, Marlon relished the chance to play mentor to another young star, Johnny Depp. And although the sci-fi thriller The Island of Dr. Moreau was a box office and critical flop, Marlon made the most of his highly theatrical character, to the amusement of co-star Val Kilmer.
He's the most interesting man, and he was one of the funniest men I've ever met. He was designing his costume, which I think he took some mosquito netting from his hotel room, and that was part of his outfit. He had decided that the UV rays would have tortured Dr. Moreau, so he covered himself in white face. And he has back to me when I came in the trailer, when I saw him for the first time. He turned around, and I fell down laughing. It was so absurd. And he said, "Oh, wait till I get my teeth in." And then he grabbed these hideous teeth that he put in with his overbite. And he said, is it too much? What do you think? And I couldn't even breathe. I was laughing so hard. And then he took the fruit bowl off the coffee table, dumped the fruit out, and put it on his head. And then I literally was howling, and he started howling, and he said, oh yeah, we're going all the way with this one. And he just threw his arms out wide, and I think I hugged him for like a minute and a half.
But for most of the 1990s, Brando was a guarded and mysterious figure. Marlon seldom left the Mulholland Drive mansion he'd owned since 1958, doors away from fellow industry mavericks Jack Nicholson and Warren Beatty. One of the few people Brando enjoyed spending time with was another reclusive celebrity, Michael Jackson. The singer had become a friend in the 1980s, after Marlon gave the King of Pop acting lessons.
Michael opened up his house to him, and he had his own room. He had a 24-hour chef, 24-hour maid service, 24-hour security. He had carte blanche. He treated him really nice.
Marlon also found solace in the company of his emotionally shattered family. He became a doting grandfather to his son Miko's 2 children.
He really enjoyed being around kids. He liked to do magic for them, do tricks and jokes, and he was a prankster with the kids.
I walked in his room as a joke and said, "Can I have your autograph?" But he was out as a joke. And he said, "What kind of stupid question is that?" And then I said, "Now will you give it to me?" He said, "Give me the paper."
He wrote down what she thought was his autograph, gave it back to her, and she read it, and it said poo-poo. So she started laughing, but that's what kind of person he was.
Every Halloween we'd spend up there, we'd decorate the house, he'd dress up.
I dressed up as Chiquita Banana, and then he dressed up as a girl too. No, as a witch, and he had the fake nose and everything. And so then we both came to the party as girls, and we were the only males there as dressed up as girls, and he's proud because he said that shows a lot of character if you could dress up as a girl.
Although Marlon Brando had put acting mostly behind him, his past performances and his enduring image as a rebel continued to make him an idol to his fellow actors. Another generation of young stars cited him as an inspiration. Performers like Leonardo DiCaprio, Benicio del Toro, and Edward Norton, who starred with Brando and Robert De Niro in the 2001 crime drama, The Score. But Marlon, now in his 70s, was in failing health. By 2004, he needed an oxygen tank to breathe. Press reports claimed he was bankrupt. Some said he was on the verge of death.
I think he hid it a lot, and he didn't really tell anyone. He didn't want the kids to know, Miko or the other ones.
But the actor had one more surprise for the world. In June of 2004, he recorded at his home what would be his final piece of acting, a character voice for the animated comedy Big Bug Man. Offered the part of an overweight candy store owner, Brando instead chose the role of a sweet, elderly woman named Mrs. Sauer.
As we're entering the house, he's sitting there, head to toe, dressed as closely as possible to what he felt the live-action version of his character would look like. Gigantic blonde curly wig, full makeup, glasses, earrings, necklace, turquoise and gold muumuu, black gloves, elbow length, jewelry.
He gave me all of Judy's records. Same pills, too. I'm somewhere over the rainbow right now.
He was a woman. He wasn't campy. He wasn't doing any of the cliches that anyone would think that a man could fall into. He didn't fall into that trap. He had created a full, rich, adorable, interesting, unpredictable character. He was not in good health, and what really was remarkable and touching was to see that he wanted to do this. He was having a ball. I said, you know, we just love working with you. And he says, well, I love working with you too. He says, bring me projects. He said, we could do Shakespeare, we could do poetry. And then he reaches over and he takes my hand and he says, let's do something for Valentine's Day. I said, you were as good as it gets. And he goes, yeah. I said, you're as good as it gets. And it just a little glistening in his eye.
But there would be no more projects. Brando's health quickly worsened, and by June of 2004, the 80-year-old realized that the end was near.
He had called me on a Sunday. We hadn't seen each other for a while. He said, I want to hear your voice, Georgie. It's just been too long. And I went up, and 2 days later, and saw him, and he was in pain. He would start to fade, and almost beautifully surrender and close his eyes.
I got a call and said that he was in the hospital. I got there about 45 minutes before he passed away. He was resting. I leaned over and talked to him, and I told him everything would be all right, and, you know, it's tough.
We were in the car driving along and suddenly heard the information that Marlon was dead. And before you knew it, I realized I was weeping. And it's right there, even at this moment. My feeling for him was kind of strangely mysterious and profound, and I felt close to him, and I loved him. I think that's really what it was.
He's alive in me. You know, the things that he taught me, the things we did together, experienced together, they come back. The music plays again.
In a private ceremony, Brando's ashes were scattered in Death Valley and in Tahiti, along with those of his old friend Wally Cox, whose ashes Marlon kept for over 30 years. Contrary to earlier press reports, Brando hadn't died broke. Far from it. Friends and family had walked. No other actor of the 20s.
I'm the king around here. He had a talent that was of the air, could fly, could do anything. But he wanted to stay of the earth. He wanted to be himself, even if that self was a dark, muddled, confused, not.
He was Marlon. He was a great actor who was, at the end, self-indulgent because there was no place else to go, nobody else to challenge. He will be remembered as, you know, a raw force, a raw fire.
You can act like a man!
There's only one Marlon Brando in all of creation, ever. So you cannot make judgments on what he should have done in performances. One of his films, which he might not consider his best, and maybe even his least, I'd take it for life, you know, and I don't know another actor who wouldn't and be glad to have it.
And the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man.